You see it, you smell it, and it seems to be everywhere. The push is on to legalize recreational marijuana use. But is it a solution or just the start of new problems? The humor in Afroman's hit drives home the deeper message that getting high can be so good you don't want to do anything else. According to a recent Gallup poll, more than 2/3 of Americans have no problem with it. But Bishop Jethro James foresees trouble ahead.
Good employers want you drug tested. And so we know if you start out on the premise that you cannot be employed, it leads to other problems.
Popular culture and music are full of smoking celebrities and weed images and references, especially in hip-hop. Bishop James is concerned legalization and increased use will make it even more difficult for young African Americans in economically disadvantaged areas to get ahead.
If you can't work, you can't eat unless you steal.
Recreational use is legal in 8 states plus the District of Columbia, but not in New York City. It's been decriminalized and overall arrests are down, but racial disparities in enforcement remain. A recent report says you're still about 8 times more likely to get arrested in New York State for smoking marijuana if you're Black or Latino, despite the fact that Blacks, Latinos, and whites smoke at comparable rates.
The smell alone or the alleged smell can establish probable cause, and that's a real problem. And so we're really interested in removing marijuana as a tool for criminalization, and we think that legalization is really the only way to do that.
I think it takes away the racial profiling tool, so to speak, and I think it actually almost slightly levels the playing field.
With a marijuana conviction on your record, it's an automatic disqualifier for many jobs and educational programs. Legalization must also rectify the damage that's been done, says Tucker.
It's not enough to say this is no longer a crime legislatively, that it needs to be a portion in there that says, you know what, we can go back and expunge it. We can recognize, we can correct our wrongs, so to speak, and right the wrongs and put these individuals back on solid ground.
There are many layers and levels to this. Let's find out what our panel has to say. Joining me is Charles Tucker, Jr. He's a criminal defense and civil rights attorney. He is the founding partner of the Tucker Moore Law Group. He also specializes in discrimination cases. Charles, great to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also with us is Bishop Jethro James. He's the pastor of the Paradise Baptist Church. He's the chaplain for the New Jersey State Police, and he's the president of the North Jersey Committee of Black Churchmen. Bishop, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Also with us is Christopher Alexander. He's the policy coordinator for the New York office for the Drug Policy Alliance, and he's leading their campaign to legalize marijuana. Chris, great to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much. Charles, I want to start with you on this. The statistics that came out and the studies that came out, various studies about this racial discrimination in marijuana law enforcement in New York City. What's legal right now and what's illegal?
Right now, currently, it's 25 grams is like the cutoff. So the possession of 25 grams. Your first and second offense is really a non-classified offense, where you can actually get a penalty of $100 on your first offense. I believe you can go up to $200 on the second offense. Upon the third offense, then it gets a little tricky. Most district attorney's offices have been handling them kind of equal across the board, where they're still, even on the third offense, it's not imposing any jail sentence, even though they could get up to 14 days in those instances. So for the most part, I believe, and again, back in my time when I was a prosecutor in Brooklyn, I can honestly say those cases were handled a lot more stricter than it seems that it is
right,
now.
And the Brooklyn DA, Chris, says the Brooklyn DA says they're not going to really prosecute these smoking charges. The same thing with the Bronx DA, that they're not really going to go heavy and go hard on those. But what do you think, and what's the sense that you have from the studies that you guys have done?
Yeah, the district attorneys have said that they're interested in using their tool discretion really to decline to prosecute some of these offenses at a greater rate. We still see, even at this point in time, 82% of cases moving forward to prosecution in Brooklyn, where that conversation really began. As we move forward in these arrests and we keep highlighting these disparities, there's an increased onus on not just law enforcement to change the way that they enforce this law, district attorneys, and using that discretion to throw out these arrests that are often made after an unconstitutional stop. but also on the legislature to change the law, which has not changed since 1977 in New York State, despite multiple shifts in policy. And so we're really interested in making sure that as we move forward beyond this point of increased criminalization, that we're putting forward policies that really shift the way law enforcement interacts with communities.
And let's talk with that. Let's talk about that too, because in New Jersey, marijuana arrests are actually up. We see in New York City, they say, the mayor and the police department say the arrests are down, but the racial breakdown, the disparate racial breakdown of those who are arrested remains the same. Bishop, what is your take on this?
Well,
do you feel the law is being unjustly enforced right now?
No, I do not. Unfortunately, in New Jersey, we're trying to get a decriminalization law. They already have that, I believe, in New York. We don't even have that. In New Jersey, we have a governor that is saying that he wants to, it's a social justice issue, but yet and still he just zero-base the budget for folks that are coming out of jail for reentry. So you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. It's not a social justice issue. It's just us about the money.
And then in terms of the overall scope of this, because you have been opposed to this, you see this as a larger issue, that this rush, what you've called the rush to legalization, people haven't really thought about what this is going to mean in communities of color in low-income areas. Why are you so concerned about that?
Well, first of all, I'm a retiree of Public Service Electric and Gas Company, Urban Development Executive. The reality is that the unemployment numbers in the African American communities across this nation are higher than that in Caucasian communities. The reality is that under the laws as they are right now, companies do not have to hire you. You will never work in law enforcement. You will never work in transit, New York or New Jersey. You will never work at PSE&G. Both Lowe's and Home Depot requires a drug test. You will never work in any place that there is a high density where folks in capacity where people will be hurt. And so automatically, right now in Essex County, where my church is and where I serve on the Human Service Advisory Council, we've been given 100 jobs for the colleges in Essex County, particularly Essex County Community College. 10,000, roughly 300, 90% of that is African American, Hispanic, and other peoples of color. For the 100 jobs that we have, we can't get 35 kids to pass the test. That's working at airports, working at the port authorities.
Because they have the marijuana in the system. Charles, in terms of the criminal piece of this, because there people were saying, well, this is great in New York City. They decriminalized the possession of that amount of marijuana, but you can still get decriminalization means you can still get a summons, right?
Right, because decriminalization is getting confused with legalization.
All right, so what's the difference? Explain that for us.
Decriminalization is the lessening of the criminal penalties imposed to an act. In this instance, we're dealing with marijuana usage. Legalization would mean an across-the-board scrubbing of any laws and penalties that would apply to the act. That has not happened here. Yeah.
So in terms of the decriminalization, what that means now in New York is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I want everybody to understand this, people, so you're right, there's a lot of confusion. People go, oh, it's decriminalized, there's no penalty, but you can still get stopped by police for it. If they find it, you get a summons, right, which a summons you either have to answer in the summons court.
And if you don't answer, a warrant is issued for your arrest. Right. A summons is still a step towards criminalization. And so, you know, as the bishop was saying, I think some of it, as the bishop was saying, we do have a decriminalization statute here in New York, and that's the statute that was passed in 1977. Right? In 1977, we decriminalized marijuana possession. We decided that that was the way to go to lessen the harm that was
for small amounts of personal use.
For small amounts of personal use. The problem is that at that time, the legislature didn't consider what would happen when racial bias overwhelmed our police departments and our police commissioners, and we created policies like stop and frisk, which is where most of our marijuana arrests have come from for low-level possession.
From that era when that was very high.
But not just very high, I mean, still currently, right? So from 1996 to present day, we've arrested over 850,000 people, mostly people of color, over 86%, for this very offense that was decriminalized. And so when we talk about decriminalization, I think it's just important to denote that we tried it here in New York in the context that the bishop is referencing, and it has not worked to alleviate the harm that's coming from criminalization.
Right. But the issue there, Lisa, I believe, lies not necessarily in the act itself. The decriminalizing was a step in the right direction.
Yes.
Because when police arrest someone, that paperwork goes down to the district attorney's office. It's up to the district attorneys to make the judicial...
Whether proceed or not proceed.
Absolutely. Because they are in the capacity to say, you know what, no, we are going to dismiss these cases. And I believe if the district attorney's office were taking a strong hand to this, with the understanding of what is really the intent behind the decriminalization, and slap these arrests down.
The law is being applied unequally to people across the country, and that should be a problem that unsettles everybody.
In terms of the Bishop, in terms of the discrimination, in terms of who's getting arrested for marijuana use, every study, whether people are pro-legalization or anti, they all say the same thing. Blacks, whites, Latinos, Asians, everybody is smoking marijuana at the same rate. What do you think about this level of discrimination at this point?
Well, discrimination is not new to America. Discrimination
But that doesn't mean make it okay.
I didn't say it made it okay. It was my group that took on the state police, and the word racial profiling is founded in New Jersey, and we did win. And so we understand that. There is discrimination in policing across this country. There's discrimination in how police even promote and do some things inside its own organization. So we're not talking about just discrimination for marijuana. There's discrimination as far as writing tickets. If you don't answer a ticket, you get arrested, you get locked up. But no one has done real prison time, and that's what we're talking about. I believe that's what we're talking about when we frame the issue. Nobody's in jail for 5, 10, 20 years for a joint. And so we need to be honest. The other thing that we
not
need
in New York,
and not in New Jersey.
You're
either.
saying somebody in New York is
no,
in
not
jail?
in New York currently, but
Right.
that was absolutely the policy and the process once the
Right.
Rockefeller drug laws created in New York were exported across the state.
Right, but you can still get arrested, go through the system, which depending upon when it happens, you end up missing work. You end up, there's other consequences.
Sure, there's health consequences.
Right.
I mean, according to the New England Journal of Medicine, just last year in their study, they said anyone, and by the way, it's not marijuana the plant. I was just at a high school just recently, and they were saying it's a plant. It's the THC. It's that chemical element, and through this cross-pollination that has caused the THC to go up in its volume, and that's what's causing heart attacks. That's what's causing emphysema. That's what's causing lung cancer. And the reality is, we're not having that discussion.
Well, let's have the discussion right now. Let's talk about the legalization. Chris, what about this? People are saying, you're talking about marijuana like this is from some old hippie movie, that it's something passive. And people in the streets, in the communities, in our inner city communities, see what happens with marijuana. It's not just the marijuana dealer anymore. The marijuana dealer also has pills, also has heroin, also has fentanyl, also has it basically has anything that you want.
Well, I want to absolutely respond. Can I respond?
Yeah,
just to
go
the
ahead,
bishop
please.
real
No,
quick?
you can do.
Well, because I think that we are missing a huge component of what marijuana prohibition really looks like. We're talking about criminalization, right?
Okay.
So criminalization, as you mentioned, will reduce people's access to employment opportunities, as the bishop has mentioned, reduce people's access to housing, reduce people's access
everything.
to education,
Basically a productive life.
Everything,
Right.
everything. And so by virtue of saying that we shouldn't reform because of the consequences of prohibition, I think we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. The bishop.
So you're saying legalization would end that discrimination?
Well, I would definitely not say that it wouldn't end the discrimination, because legalizing marijuana is not going to legalize black people. But
Right.
what we will say is that this is a key tool for law enforcement in criminalizing communities, right? And so as we talk about the fact that yes, this is against the law currently, the problem and people who are pro-marijuana, anti-marijuana have to agree, or at least on this component of the issue, that the law is being applied unequally to people across the country, and that should be a problem that unsettles everybody.
Okay, let's talk about what does legalization look like. Charles, let me start with you on that.
What it sounds like legalization would be taking away the tool, taking away the law that's currently in place that makes it a legal, a penalty or fine or anything, a crime in New York to possess this 25 grams of marijuana. And giving it, I think at that point, it wouldn't even make sense to keep anything else on the books that would be inconsistent with that. Whether or not it actually happens remains to be seen. But what I think, to Mr. Alexander's point, I don't think he's condoning some of the negative social effects that potential legalization could lead into the communities. What he's saying is from a disproportionate impact, we need to take this weapon that is now being used by police departments to target young African American males and females and remove it. And then,
and take it from there. What do you think about that, Bishop? Legalization. What does legalization look like to you? From where you stand?
From where I stand, it looks like a nightmare and another tool to strip the African American community of its ability to be educated in the better schools, to have the better employment, to bring forth healthier children, and to deal with the realities of the community and public housing where it's not allowed, period. It would be a scourge to our youth. We know in states that have legalized, in the African American community, you want to talk about legalization, it's still not legal for a minor to possess it.
Right.
And so what we're seeing is that now we don't have to wait until you're 18 or 21 in whichever state you want to legalize it in. You're caught with it between 11 and 17. And so the reality is now you start off with a juvie record. You start off with getting kicked out of school.
Chris,
you start off with the system. And so legalization will only add to that.
And the stigma.
Yeah.
And the stigma. Chris, what about that?
Briefly, I think what's important as we move forward to ending prohibition is making sure that we're not increasing criminalization for young people. What we've done
but how do we
in the
do that? How do we do
in the
that?
state of New York, that is pending in the state of New York, the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, is make sure that we treat underage use and possession like we treat underage drinking, where the substance is confiscated but no criminal record is created. And so that's the way that you limit the harm that you see from youth use, but also make sure that the harm that comes from criminalization, which is much worse and much more significant, is not also pending on these folks. What legalization looks like, we're seeing it. We're watching it happen right now. We've got Colorado, who just hit $600 million in tax revenue from this industry, and they're building schools every day as New York City closes them. And
not true. That is not true. Then the numbers in Colorado, talking to former mayor of Denver, Mayor Webb, whom I know personally, said they're not seeing the money in the school. I was just in Washington, D.C. last month, talked to an alderwoman. What they're seeing is these street trucks going out to events. They're not even asking, just like food trucks, they're not asking for ID, they're selling to youth. And there's not enough law enforcement to stop the bad guys.
Okay, but what about the deal? Yeah, but what about the dealing? What about the way, like if it's legalized, Chris, and according to the law that's being considered in New York, if it's legalized, so does that mean anybody can just become a dealer?
No, you've got to be licensed. You've got to go through a state licensing process, like other businesses, like liquor businesses, for example. You got to get licensed, and there are very strict regulations and guidelines that you have to meet to keep that license. And also, the Department of Revenue from the state of Colorado is what reported that revenue number, so I'm not making that up.
I want to thank all of you for being with us for this episode of Street Soldiers. Attorney Charles Tucker Jr., great to have you with us. Thank you. Bishop Jethro James, great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Chris Alexander from the Drug Policy Alliance, thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Street Soldiers. I'm Lisa Evers. Remember, use your mind. It's your best weapon. I hope it's your only weapon. Let's push for peace.